I used to believe that family was everything, that no matter what, they'd be there for you, through thick and thin, that parents were supposed to love their children unconditionally, to protect them, to be the safety net when life became too much. That's what I thought. That's what I clung to, until the day my father proved me wrong. When my mom was alive, things were different. She was the glue that held everything together. She made sure I felt loved, that I felt seen. But when she got sick, my world started falling apart. And when she passed, it shattered completely. I was 19, barely an adult, still trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. But life didn't wait for me to catch up. My father didn't wait. Less than a year after she was gone, he remarried. Linda, I don't know if it was the loneliness or just pure selfishness, but he barely grieved before bringing another woman into our home. And Linda, she made it clear from the very beginning, I didn't belong. She wasn't cruel outright. It was more subtle than that. The passive-aggressive comments, the cold shoulders, the way she made decisions about our house like I was just a guest overstaying my welcome. And my father? He didn't stand up for me. He didn't fight for me. He just let it happen. At first, I tried to ignore it. I told myself things would get better, that she'd get used to me, that maybe my father would finally realize how much I was hurting. But then came the day when the tension snapped. I'll never forget that night. I had just come home from work, exhausted, juggling school and a part-time job, trying to stay afloat while still grieving my mother. Linda was in the kitchen, cooking, and when she saw me, she barely looked up. But then my father came in, and his expression was different. Cold, distant, like I wasn't his daughter, just someone he tolerated. "We need to talk," he said, his voice unervingly calm. I knew something was wrong, but I wasn't prepared for what came next. "It's time you figured things out on your own," he said, crossing his arms like this was some kind of casual discussion. "You're an adult now. You can't live here forever." I blinked, thinking I had misheard him. "What?" "You need to move out," Linda chimed in, her voice almost too sweet, like she was enjoying it. "We think it's best for everyone." I looked at my father, waiting for him to correct her, to take it back, to say that of course I had a home here, that he wasn't actually throwing his only daughter out barely a year after losing her mother. But he didn't. I felt the walls closing in, panic tightening my chest. "I don't have anywhere to go," I whispered. He shrugged, like it wasn't his problem. "You'll figure it out." I tried to reason with him. I begged him to let me stay until I had enough saved up, just a few more months. I wasn't asking for money. I wasn't asking for anything other than a place to sleep. But all he did was shake his head and tell me I'd be fine. And just like that, I was on my own. I packed my things and left. There was no tearful goodbye, no last-minute apology. Just me, dragging my suitcase down the driveway, trying not to cry as the front door shut behind me. I struggled. I couch-surfed. I worked 2 jobs just to afford rent on a place that barely had running water. I scraped by, wondering every single night how the man who was supposed to protect me could throw me away like I meant nothing. But I survived. I fought my way through school, balancing work and classes on sheer determination. I built myself from the ground up, one exhausting day at a time. And eventually, I made it. I landed a real job, got my degree, climbed my way up the corporate ladder until I was making 6 figures, living in a home I paid for with my own money. I was stable, independent, everything my father had never believed I could be. I never thought I'd hear from him again. And then, last week my phone rang, an unknown number. I almost didn't pick up, but something told me to, and when I did, my heart nearly stopped. His voice was weaker, thinner than I remembered. "Sophia, it's me?" I stood there, gripping my phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. "It's been a long time," he continued, and I could hear the hesitation, the unease. I need your help." For a second, I thought I misheard him. "Help? From me? The daughter he abandoned?" He cleared his throat. "I'm not doing too well right now. Linda left, took everything. I have nowhere else to turn." My breath caught. Those words, those exact words. He had nowhere else to turn. The same thing I had told him all those years ago, standing in that kitchen, begging him not to throw me away. And now he was coming to me for help. I stared at my phone, his voice still ringing in my ears. "I have no one else to turn to," The same words I had said to him years ago. The same words that had fallen on deaf ears. I should have felt satisfaction, a sense of justice. After all, wasn't this exactly what he deserved? To know what it felt like to be cast aside, to feel the cold emptiness of having no one to catch you when you fall. But instead, all I felt was a familiar ache in my chest, a pain I had spent years burying. I took a slow, shaky breath and forced myself to stay calm. "Why are you calling me?" My voice was flat, emotionless. He sighed heavily on the other end of the line. "Sophia, look, I know I wasn't the best father. I made mistakes. I should have been there for you." His voice cracked, and for a brief moment I thought maybe, just maybe, there was sincerity in his words. But then came the real reason. "I just need some help, sweetheart," he continued, and the way he said sweetheart made my stomach turn. Just for a little while, I wouldn't ask if I had another choice. I closed my eyes, gripping the phone so tightly my fingers ached. I could feel it. The manipulation, the desperation. He wasn't calling because he regretted what he had done. He was calling because he needed something. Because suddenly, now that he had lost everything, I was useful to him. Just like that, I was 19 again. I had nowhere to go. That night, after my father shut the door on me, I sat outside on the curb, my suitcase beside me. My hands were numb from gripping the handle too tightly, my breath uneven as I tried to hold back tears. I thought about calling someone, an old friend, maybe, but it was late, and the last thing I wanted was pity. So I sat there, watching the lights in the house flicker off one by one, realizing that I was well and truly alone. I spent that night at a cheap motel, using the last of the money in my bank account. The bed was hard, the sheets rough against my skin, but I barely noticed. I curled into myself, staring at the stained ceiling, replaying my father's words over and over in my head. "You're an adult now. Figure it out." I had no choice. I had to figure it out. "Sophia." His voice pulled me back to the present. "Are you still there?" I blinked, my grip loosening on the phone. My heart was pounding in my chest, a war raging inside me. This was my father, the man who had abandoned me, but also the man who had raised me, at least for a while. For years, I had convinced myself that I was over it, that I had moved on. I told myself that his choices no longer had power over me, that I didn't need his love, his approval. But now, with him on the other end of the line, vulnerable and desperate, I realized something terrifying. I wanted him to apologize. Genuinely. I wanted him to say the words, to admit what he had done, to tell me that he regretted every single moment he had failed me. But deep down, I already knew he wouldn't. So I asked the question I needed to ask, even though I already knew the answer. "What exactly do you need from me?" There was a pause, a long, heavy pause, and then he said it. "I need money." A bitter laugh escaped before I could stop it. I let my head fall back against the chair, staring at the ceiling in disbelief. "Of course you do. Sophia, please just listen to me. Linda left, took everything. I've got debts piling up. I could lose my house, lose his house, the house he kicked me out of, the house where he and Linda started their new life, while I was working 2 jobs just to afford rent in a mold-infested apartment." I clenched my jaw, anger burning through me like fire. "You mean the house that was more important than your own daughter?" "Sophia, do you have any idea what it was like for me?" I cut him off, my voice rising. "Do you even care? Because I remember, Dad. I remember every single night I spent wondering how you could throw me away like I was nothing." There was silence. For the first time, I could hear him breathing heavily, like he was actually thinking about what I was saying. Like maybe, for once, he felt something close to regret. But then he sighed, and just like that, whatever hope I had shattered. "I did what I thought was right at the time," he said, his voice carrying that same dismissive tone I had heard so many years ago. "You were an adult, Sophia. You had to learn how to stand on your own 2 feet. I let out a sharp, bitter laugh. "Right? So, why is it different now? Aren't you an adult? Shouldn't you figure it out?" "Sophia, this isn't the same thing. Isn't it?" My voice cracked, my chest tightening. "Because when I begged you for help, you didn't care. You didn't care if I was homeless, if I was starving. But now that it's you in that position, suddenly it's different." He went quiet again. For a moment, I wondered if I had finally gotten through to him. if maybe, just maybe, he would finally see what he had done. But then he spoke again, and his words cut through whatever tiny sliver of hope I had left. You can't seriously hold that against me forever. Forever. Like the years of struggle, the nights spent wondering why my own father didn't love me enough to keep me, were just a minor inconvenience. Like my pain had an expiration date. And that was when I knew. Nothing had changed. He wasn't sorry. Not really. He didn't regret what he did. He just regretted that now, after all these years, he was the one suffering. I closed my eyes, swallowing the lump in my throat. I had spent years waiting for this moment, this chance to tell him exactly how much he had hurt me. But standing here, hearing his voice, I realized something else. I didn't need his apology anymore. I didn't need him at all. You know what, Dad? My voice was eerily calm now. I did figure it out, without you. And I'm not going to be your backup plan just because things didn't work out for you. Sophia, please. Goodbye, Dad. I ended the call before he could say another word. For a long time, I just stood there staring at my phone, my heart racing. I expected to feel something: guilt, sadness, regret. But instead, I just felt free. For the first time in years, I wasn't the abandoned daughter desperate for her father's love. I wasn't the girl begging to be wanted. I was just me, and that was enough. The moment I ended the call, I thought that would be the end of it, that I had finally closed the chapter on my father for good. But as the days passed, a gnawing feeling lingered inside me, an unfinished thread in a story I thought I had already written. I told myself I didn't care, that I owed him nothing, and I didn't. But a part of me still wanted something. Not closure, not reconciliation, just answers. So when he called again a few days later, this time from a different number, I did something I never thought I would. I answered. His voice was quieter this time, weaker. Sophia, he breathed, almost relieved that I picked up. I know I don't deserve it, but please, just meet me. One time. Let me explain. I should have said no. But instead, I found myself saying fine. We met at a small diner on the outskirts of town. It was the kind of place that hadn't changed in decades. Red vinyl booths, checkered floors, the scent of cheap coffee lingering in the air. It was a stark contrast to the sleek, polished restaurants I was used to now. I spotted him immediately, and for a moment, I almost didn't recognize him. My father, who had once stood tall and confident, looked frail. The lines on his face had deepened, his once strong frame now thin and slouched. He looked older than his 58 years, like life had chewed him up and spit him out. A part of me, the part that still remembered him from before, almost felt sorry for him. Almost. He looked up as I approached, his eyes scanning my face for any sign of warmth. He didn't find any. Sophia, he said, attempting a weak smile. You look good. I sat down without acknowledging the compliment, folding my hands in my lap. Say what you need to say. He sighed, rubbing his face like he was bracing himself. I know you don't want to hear excuses, but I want you to know that I never wanted things to turn out like this. I scoffed. Oh, you never wanted to throw your only daughter out like she was nothing? That's funny, because from where I stood, it sure seemed like a choice. He flinched but nodded. I did what I thought was right at the time. There it was. The same line. The same pathetic excuse he had fed me over the phone. I leaned forward, my voice low and sharp. No, Dad. You did what was convenient. You married Linda, and she didn't want me around, so you got rid of me. It was easier for you that way. His lips pressed into a thin line, guilt flickering across his features. But he still couldn't admit it. Instead, he shook his head. You were strong, Sophia. I thought you'd be fine. I didn't realize how hard it was for you. I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. That's the problem, Dad. You never realized. You never cared. Silence stretched between us. He looked down at his hands, calloused and weathered. I was wrong, he finally said. I know that now, and I regret it every day. I stared at him, searching for something, some sign that this was real, that he truly meant it. But then, like clockwork, he added, But Sophia, I need your help. And just like that, the illusion shattered. Of course, this wasn't about making things right. This wasn't about regret. This was about survival. You still don't get it, do you? My voice was quieter now, but somehow it felt louder, stronger. His eyes darted to mine, confusion flashing across his face. What do you mean? I exhaled slowly, pressing my palms against the table. If Linda never left you, if you weren't broke and alone right now, would you have reached out to me? He opened his mouth, then closed it. And in that hesitation, I had my answer. I swallowed, a lump forming in my throat, but I forced myself to push past it. You don't regret what you did, Dad. You regret the consequences. And that's not the same thing. His expression crumbled, panic setting in. Sophia, please. I stood up. I should have felt triumph. I should have felt victorious. But all I felt was tired. I spent years wondering why I wasn't enough. I said, voice steady despite the weight in my chest. Why it was so easy for you to walk away from me. But now, I finally understand. It wasn't about me. It was about you. Your comfort. Your convenience. He shook his head, eyes pleading. That's not true. Yes, it is. I cut him off, and I refuse to let it define me anymore. His face twisted, desperate. But I'm still your father. I felt my stomach turn at those words. How easy it was for him to claim the title now, when it suited him. I met his gaze one final time, and then I let go. No, I said softly, shaking my head. You were never my father. Fathers don't abandon their children. And with that, I walked away. No money, no help, no second chances. For the first time in my life, I chose myself, and it felt freeing. The air outside the diner was crisp, the late afternoon sun casting golden light over the city streets. I stood there for a moment, letting the cool breeze wash over me, grounding myself in the present. I had done it. I had finally walked away. And yet, as I stood on the sidewalk, staring at nothing in particular, a strange weight settled over me. Not regret, not sadness, but something quieter. Finality. For years, my father's absence had been this open wound, a question mark hanging over every milestone of my life. Would he ever come back? Would he ever say he was sorry? Did he even think about me at all? Now, I had my answer. And strangely, knowing it was over, truly, completely over, brought a kind of peace I hadn't expected. I exhaled, pulled out my phone, and dialed a familiar number. Rachel picked up on the second ring. Hey, you okay? I smiled, a small, tired thing. I think so. Did you meet him? Yeah. I glanced back at the diner through the window. My father was still sitting there, hunched over the table, staring at the empty space where I had been. I wondered what he was thinking, if he was feeling anything close to what I had felt all those years ago. Not that it mattered anymore. Rachel sighed. How did it go? I swallowed, finding the words. He wanted money. That's why he called. Not because he regretted what he did. Not because he missed me. Just because he was out of options. She was silent for a moment. Then, softly, she said, I'm sorry, sophomore. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. Yeah, me too. But you didn't give it to him, right? I let out a quiet laugh. No, I didn't. Good. There was no hesitation in her voice. You don't owe him anything. I closed my eyes for a second, letting those words sink in. You don't owe him anything. She was right. I had spent so much of my life wondering if I was the problem, if I had somehow failed as a daughter. But the truth was he had failed as a father, and I wasn't responsible for fixing that. You want to come over? Rachel offered. I'll open a bottle of wine. We can sit on the couch, watch something trashy, and pretend today didn't happen. I smiled, warmth blooming in my chest. This was family. The people who showed up for you. The ones who cared without conditions. Yeah, I said. That sounds perfect. Later that evening, curled up on Rachel's couch, a glass of wine in my hand, I let my mind wander back over the last few days. For so long, I had thought closure meant an apology, that it meant hearing my father say he was sorry, that he regretted everything. But now I realized closure wasn't about him. It never had been. It was about me. It was about finally letting go of the hope that he would become the father I had always wanted him to be. About understanding that I didn't need his love or his validation to be whole. I don't know why I ever thought I needed him, I admitted aloud, staring at the rim of my glass. Rachel shifted beside me, tucking her legs under herself. Because you were a kid, she said simply. Because every kid wants their parents to love them. And when they don't, it messes with you. I nodded slowly. But I'm not a kid anymore. No, she agreed. And look at everything you've built without him. I thought about it. The life I had. My career. My home. My friendships. Every bit of it I had created for myself. I had built something solid, something real. And he hadn't been a part of any of it. I took a deep breath, feeling the last of the weight lift from my chest. Just because someone is family doesn't mean they deserve a place in your life. I murmured, more to myself than anything. Rachel clinked her glass against mine. Damn right. I smiled. I had spent years haunted by the past, by the father who had abandoned me. But now I was free. I built my life without him, I said, the words settling deep in my bones. And I will continue living it without him. Rachel grinned. Hell yes, you will. I laughed, the sound lighter than it had been in years. Because for the first time since I was 19, I knew I was finally free. Family isn't about blood. It's about who's there when you need them. And he wasn't. There was a time when I would have done anything for my father. A time when I would have given anything just to hear him say he was proud of me, that he loved me, that I meant something to him. But life had a way of teaching me lessons I never asked for. I learned that love, at least the kind that is real and unconditional, isn't something you have to chase. It isn't something you have to earn. And it certainly isn't something you have to beg for. For years, I thought if I could just be successful enough, independent enough, good enough, maybe he would see me differently. Maybe he would regret what he did. Maybe he would finally look at me and choose me. But he didn't. Because people like him, people who take and take but never give, don't change. So I chose myself. And it was the best decision I ever made. But now, I want to ask you something. What would you do if someone who abandoned you, who threw you away when you needed the most, came back years later? Asking for help, would you give it? Would you extend a hand to them, knowing they never did the same for you? Or would you walk away? I know there are some who will say, but he's still your father. Some who believe that blood is thicker than anything else, that no matter what, family should be forgiven. And maybe for some, that's true. But I also know there are others out there like me. Others who have spent years carrying the weight of someone else's choices. Others who have been told they should forgive, should let the past go, should be the bigger person, even when it hurts. So tell me, what would you do? Drop a comment. Share your story. Let's talk about this. Because this isn't just my story. I know there are so many of you who have been through something similar. And maybe, just maybe, by talking about it, we can help each other heal. Because sometimes, the best thing you can do for yourself is to walk away from those who never valued you.